He knocked on the door of a large manor and pushed it open without waiting. She had reincarnated as a background character in an otome game. Somehow, the Yandere Villainess had fallen for her. A door slammed open nearby. Someone demanded to know where she'd been. Eleonore called out the name Arx. The setting was Celestia Kingdom, the world of an otome game that had gotten popular in Japan for its many possible endings. Among all the characters, Eleonore stood out for her outrageous misdeeds. In that world, Arx Leafort didn't appear by name in any story branch. In other words, he was just a background character. Not that it really bothered him. He barely remembered his past life. The usual idea was to use that knowledge to get ahead. Apparently, he was smart, strong, and someone even liked him for some reason. What he did remember was living in a place called Japan. And for some reason, the only thing that stuck was everything about this game. Right now, he had no family in this world, and was living a quiet life at an orphanage that took him in. He wondered why he'd even ended up here. As a background character, he had no powers. Main characters got amazing magic and exciting school lives with the others. Even so, he told himself there might still be a big opportunity waiting somewhere out there. For now, he just decided to enjoy this world. He trained hard outside, swinging and blocking until he knocked his opponent clean off their feet. The match was called. Arx won. His opponent laughed and gave up on the spot, telling him he was good. The crowd reacted. He had just beaten every adult in the village. A younger kid ran up and asked if they trained hard enough. Could they become like him too? Arx said of course, while keeping to himself that he'd only trained out of boredom since there were no games to play. The strength had just built up on its own. He laughed it off. It wasn't like he was going to become a knight or anything. It was only really good for dealing with monsters near the village. The orphanage director walked over and congratulated him. The director patted him on the head, saying he never imagined that kid would grow up to be so remarkable. Arx laughed awkwardly. He pushed back. Becoming a knight was impossible for a commoner like him. The director disagreed. Someone as capable as him could definitely do it. Then the director mentioned he had a favor to ask. Arx went quiet. The director brought Arx to a grand building. Arx felt completely out of place and wondered if they were really supposed to be there. Inside, the director told him there was someone who really wanted to meet him. Arx had no idea who that could be. A man walked in, apologizing for being late. He introduced himself as Adalbert Ancinous, the count who governed the region. Arx went stiff. A count was talking to him directly. He introduced himself back as Arx Leafort, barely holding it together. The count confirmed he'd heard about Arx's achievements and called him there for an important favor. The director vouched for him. A capable kid, a few rough edges but nothing serious. The count asked Arx to become a friend for his daughter. Arx froze. The count went out of his way to summon an orphan just for that. Arx wondered what was wrong with her. A bad personality? Some illness? The count mentioned she had a troublesome nature. Before Arx could process that, the count called his daughter in. Arx caught himself. Wait, Ancinous. The girl stepped into the room. She introduced herself as Eleonore Ancinous and gave a quiet greeting. Arx stared. Arx recognized the name immediately. Eleonore Ancinous, the villainess who went after the protagonist out of pure spite. In the game, she set up curses and worse. She was the root of all the story's evil, the final boss. They wanted him to be friends with her. The count pushed them together, telling them to talk for a bit. Arx went along with it, unsure what else to do. They ended up in the garden outside. Eleonore mentioned the gardener kept it up regularly and that she never got tired of looking at it. Arx just thought the whole situation was painfully awkward. The count had called her cute, and honestly Arx couldn't disagree. She was completely expressionless. He'd never expected a kid to pull that off. Still, he found himself looking. She was a main character after all. Even quiet and closed off, something about her pulled his attention. Eleonore asked if something was wrong. Arx snapped back to attention. She went still and looked down. A servant stepped closer and asked if she wanted to head back to the mansion. Eleonore looked up at Arx and asked flat out. He didn't actually want to be friends with her, did he? Arx went blank. She told him she understood. He didn't want to be around someone as cursed as her. No point hiding it, everyone felt that way. She stood alone while people nearby whispered about her. The girl from the Ancinous family. Get too close and misfortune follows. She said some had tried to get close because she was a noble's daughter, but all they ever gave her after was hateful looks. People panicked at the sight of her, calling her a cursed child. They feared her eyes and her power. After a certain point, no one spoke to her again. She remembered every one of those moments. Eleonore said she was already used to it. She knew that was the right way people reacted. Arcs went still. She reached toward a flower nearby, and it wilted instantly at her touch. Arcs flinched. Something shot past him. He spun around. The flower in her hand had gone black and dead. She told him to see for himself. Everything she touched lost its color, withered, and died. Plants. People too. Arcs stared, unable to process the scale of what he was seeing. Arcs called her name. Eleonore looked up at him, calm, and told him he understood now. She was a cursed child. The Count's request echoed in Arc's head. He had no idea she'd been carrying all of that. He still didn't understand why he'd ended up in this world. But standing there, he wondered if this was the reason. If he stepped in now, could he change where her story was headed? He decided he would steer the story toward a good ending, one where no one ended up miserable. To do that, he had to get close to her and stop the bad end from happening. He called her name and stepped toward her. He told her flat out. He didn't find her appearance unsettling, and there was nothing about her to be afraid of. Eleonore jolted. Then he added, completely serious, that she was unbelievably beautiful. Eleonore stared at him. A dead rose nearby started to bloom. Eleonore hesitated. She appreciated the kind words, but her power could end up hurting someone. Arcs looked at the withered flowers and said he couldn't fully rule that out, but there had to be a better way to use that power. He reached out and placed his hand over hers. Even if something went wrong, he'd find a way to deal with it. Eleonore held the blooming roses and faced him. She asked if he would be her friend. Arcs looked back at her. People shouted at Eleonore to stay back, calling her a devil and a filthy crow, warning that the curse would spread. She stood still and took it. Then she reached out and touched a flower. It went black and died in her hand. Arcs flinched. She had been so scared. She called out for her mother. A woman stood nearby, but didn't move toward her. Eleonore looked up. The woman just stared back. Eleonore stood alone in the dark. The woman told her to stop looking at her with those eyes. Eleonore reached out, her voice breaking. She kept apologizing over and over until she couldn't stop. She said she was sorry for being born. Arcs jolted awake. Eleonore was right beside him, eyes wide, calling his name. He asked if she was okay. She had looked like she was having a bad nightmare. Eleonore blinked, confused about where she was. Arcs reminded her they had been talking in her room, and she had fallen asleep mid-conversation from exhaustion. He figured that was why the dream had been so rough. Eleonore went quiet at the sound of her name. Eleonore's eyes were wet. Arcs froze. Then she started crying for real, and he had no idea what to do. Eleonore sniffled. Arcs sat there stiff and flustered, then slowly patted her on the back. She pressed her face into her hands and kept crying. Her chest thumped hard. Then something clicked. She had asked him to be her friend. Eleonore warned him that being around someone like her would make him unhappy, and that she might hurt him too. Arcs pushed back immediately. Being with her was exactly what he wanted. He told her nobody gets through life without hurting anyone. She squeezed her sleeve and suggested he find someone else. Arcs grabbed her hand. Arcs told her he only wanted her. Eleonore stared at him. He held her gaze. She hesitated, then quietly agreed to get along with him. He told her to take care of him too. They sat together on the floor. Eleonore apologized for crying on him. Arcs told her not to. He meant it. She could always lean on him. Eleonore let out a small laugh and told him he really was kind. Arcs shrugged and said he was just doing what any friend would. Eleonore admitted she had never had anyone she could even call an ally, let alone a friend. She wondered quietly if she could really manage to be a friend like him. Arcs told her it was fine. He told her friendship comes in all kinds of shapes, and he just went with whatever felt right. Getting better at it just takes practice. The more people you get to know, the more naturally it comes. Eleonore looked at him, something shifting in her expression. Eleonore said they should take it slowly. Arcs agreed. After all, life was a lot longer than people realized. He walked away down the hall feeling lighter. A few weeks passed. Eleonore called out to Arcs, excited. She had used her magic to make flowers bloom. She offered him pastries and pointed out the stars. Arcs stared at her and thought to himself that this was way too big a change. He couldn't process it. She kept calling his name. Eleonore got right in his face and asked if he was even listening. Arcs snapped back and apologized, saying he had been lost in thought. She crossed her arms, unimpressed. Arx thought to himself that she was cute when she did that, and he was genuinely happy. Eleonore asked if there was something more important than what she was saying. Arx said of course not. Nothing was more important to him than her. Eleonore held his gaze. Arx started to say something about himself. Arx leaned forward, and Eleonore burst out laughing. Arx struck a pose, completely serious. Nearby girls reacted with obvious excitement. Then a knock at the door interrupted everything. Eleonore cut him off and told him to hurry up and tell her what kind of clothes he liked. Arx scratched his head. Eleonore looked up to find her father, Adalbert, in the doorway asking to borrow Arx for a moment. He apologized to Eleonore and said he needed him briefly. As Arx followed the Count out, he glanced back. Eleonore watched them go, visibly unhappy. Arx could tell. Eleonore told herself it didn't matter. Arx had been spacing out for a while anyway. She crossed her arms and turned away with a humph. Then Arx leaned close and said her name softly. He told her that whatever she wore, it would look beautiful on her. Eleonore's eyes went wide. Arx gave a casual wave as he left with the Count, who stood in the doorway watching the whole exchange with quiet amusement. The Count told Arx that the request he had made earlier had been approved. Arx jumped at the news. The Count confirmed it. Starting next week, Arx would be part of the Ancinous household. Arx thanked him. The Count asked if he was really okay with the arrangement, noting he could have at least provided him with a proper place to stay. Arx said it worked out fine. No more commuting, and having a job was a bonus. The Count looked at him with quiet surprise, remarking that it was remarkable for someone only 7 years old to think that way. Arx made clear he had no intention of taking advantage of Adalbert's position. Arx pointed out that the Count had seen that in him. That was exactly why he had chosen him as Eleonore's friend. The Count smiled and admitted Arx had understood more than expected. Arx said he would do his best, but there was one thing he wanted to take care of first. Arx came back to find Eleonore waiting, and she was not happy. He could tell right away. She had been sitting there worrying the whole time, and demanded to know if talking with her father had really been that entertaining. Arx knocked on her door and called her name. He apologized for being late and formally introduced himself. Arx Leaford, reporting for duty. He told her that from that day forward, he would serve as her attendant. He reached out his hand. Staff rushed around the hall. One reported there weren't enough glasses. Another came running about the aperitif supplier needing to be contacted immediately. A maid moved quickly through it all, focused on the main hall arrangements. Arx let out a long sigh. 3 years had passed since he joined the household. Eleonore was about to turn 10. In this world, milestone birthdays and multiples of 10 were celebrated in a big way, and right now the whole house was caught up in party preparations. A maid found him slumped at a desk and told him the hall was ready. This was his first time handling a noble's party. Arx thanked Nanai-san for her work and asked if she was tired. She said the day before always got hectic, but thanks to him, everything was ready for tomorrow. Arx smiled at that. On the desk sat a pile of papers and books, left there for some reason. Arx was pulled in every direction, people calling his name, asking what to do, running to him with problems. At 10 years old, he had somehow ended up overseeing the entire party. He had only offered a few ideas from his past life, and it had snowballed from there. Nanai-san told him he was amazing, not just for the ideas, but for jumping in and handling things himself. Arx just laughed it off. It was all for Eleonore-sama. This was their first big celebration since they had met, and he wanted to make it something worth seeing, just to see her smile. He used his magic to shape a stone fixture into place. A little fatigue meant nothing for that. He cast a healing spell on himself, and the tiredness lifted. Nanai-san looked at him, surprised he had already changed and was heading out for training. Arx grinned and told her to do her best tomorrow, then headed out the door. He trained alone in the dark garden, cutting through the air until he decided that was enough for the day. He caught his breath, then heard his name. He spun around. Eleonore was standing right there. She asked how long he had been training outside. Arx apologized. He honestly hadn't noticed her at all. She told him he would catch a cold. He asked why she would do that herself. Eleonore moved closer and told him that even so, Arx would warm her up. Arx went blank. He thought to himself that she could probably just use a warming spell herself, but held his tongue. He noted there were spells that could raise body temperature. Eleonore pointed out that he had barely come to see her lately because of how busy he had been. She started to say he belonged to her, then caught herself and rephrased, asking if as her servant he shouldn't always be by her side. Arx apologized and admitted he was just stretched too thin. Her hand tightened slightly. Arx told her it was all for tomorrow, so they could give her a proper celebration. Eleonore went quiet. She accepted it, saying tomorrow was an important day after all. Eleonore suggested they go back inside since it was cold. Arx agreed quickly. She asked quietly if he was ever lonely. Arx looked at her, genuinely surprised. He told her not at all. Adalbert-sama and all the other servants had been good to him. Eleonore looked away. Eleonore turned and walked back, telling him to handle things tomorrow. Arx watched her go, wondering if he had said something wrong. As they walked side by side, she used a small spell, and Arx sneezed. The decorated hall waited, ready for the next day. The party began. The Count welcomed the guests from above. He spotted Arx below and gave a quiet nod. Arx understood. Keep an eye out. Deal with anyone who causes trouble for her. Arx spotted two unfamiliar faces nearby and felt something was off. The two moved away before he could get a better look. Arx peeked carefully around a column, wondering if they had noticed him watching. The Count's voice rang out, announcing the arrival of the guest of honor, Eleonore. Eleonore descended the stairs. Arx stared. The hall stirred as she made her entrance. Arx stood among the staff, watching her from a distance, a small object held in his hand. Arx couldn't look away. Eleonore walked down with her attendant, composed and steady. Arx watched her face. She glanced his way for just a moment. Eleonore moved into the hall surrounded by guests and staff. Arx watched from the side and thought to himself that she looked incredible. 3 years really did change a person. Arx was overseeing the whole event and knew he couldn't stay by her side. Nanaisen found him in the corridor and whispered his name. She looked hesitant. He asked what was wrong. Wasn't she supposed to be guarding Eleonore-sama? Nanaisen started to explain, trailing off. Arx had no idea how he had ended up seated beside Eleonore at her own birthday party. Every eye in the room was on him. Eleonore noticed he had gone pale and asked if he was all right. He thought to himself about whose fault this was, while she sat there pouting. Eleonore pointed out that Arx was supposed to be her attendant, but was never actually by her side. A servant sitting next to the guest of honor was unusual, and she knew it. Arx asked about the other guests. Eleonore insisted firmly that Arx was not just any servant. Eleonore said Arx should be celebrated too. Arx looked at her. She confirmed they were the same age and asked if that was about right. He said yes, more or less. She pointed out that no one was celebrating his birthday. The Count had also mentioned Arx was around 10. Arx admitted he had never had a proper birthday celebration because he didn't know his exact date. Arx thought to himself that this was probably what Eleonore had meant. She had seated him beside her as an equal guest. She really did have a beautiful heart. Arx thought about how far she had come from the girl who once expected nothing from the world. There was simply no way someone like her could become the final boss. Eleonore started to say it was an honor, but Arx cut in gently. Just having her celebrate for him was already more than enough. Eleonore went quiet, and her face flushed slightly. Arx told her he wanted to make sure the party went perfectly, for her sake. She started to say something about afterward, her voice trailing off. Arx turned his focus back to the hall, still uneasy about the two guests who had slipped away earlier. He hoped nothing would happen. From above, someone watched the two of them. Eleonore and Arx sat side by side at the table. She pushed food toward him and asked if he had tried it yet. Arx was stuck. Every guest in the room was staring at them. Eleonore kept adding more to his plate. One of the guests from earlier approached and formally addressed Eleonore, asking her to dance. Arx recognized the face. It matched someone from the game. Arx stared at him, putting the pieces together. Reijou Kilmond, the Viscount's son. He had been younger when the game started, which was why Arx hadn't placed him right away. In the game, he was rough-mouthed and aggressive, but fiercely devoted to the protagonist, which made him popular. Right now he was telling Arx to get lost. Reijou was one of the romance options from the Celestia Kingdom story. He repeated himself, telling Eleonore he would dance with her. Eleonore turned and asked if he met with her. Arx watched. Eleonore refused. Reijou couldn't believe it. She told him plainly she had no desire to dance with him. He pushed back, demanding to know why. She started to add something else. He reached for her. Arx stepped in and caught Reijou's wrist before he could grab her. They locked eyes. Reijou went stiff. Reijou shouted at Arx to know his place. Arx told him his name and role, Eleonore-sama's attendant. His job was to protect her, and he intended to do it. Reijou called it brutality, insisting he had only asked her to dance. Arx told him to calm down and pointed out plainly that a Viscount's son causing a scene at the party of a higher-ranking noble's daughter would reflect badly on his family. Reijou demanded to know why he should care. Arx laid it out simply, because it would be a problem for him. Reijou hesitated. Arx noted calmly that for someone their age, 10 years old, this was probably about the right level of trouble to cause. He wasn't an idiot, just a spoiled kid. Arx told him to back down, and he would let this drop. Reijou reluctantly agreed and pulled away. Arx exhaled. Reijou turned and swung at Arx anyway. Arx took the hit and went down. Eleonore flinched. Reijou shouted that Arx had disgraced him. Arx lay there, thinking to himself what a pain this was. Then he cast a sleep spell, and Reijou dropped. Reijou went limp and slumped over, out cold. Arx called out to Nanai-san and told her to get Kilman-sama and Adalbert-sama. Nanai-san rushed off. Eleonore ran over and called Arx's name, asking if he was hurt. Arx told her not to worry about him and asked if she was okay. She told him to worry about himself first. Eleonore pointed out that his hand was swollen. Arx said it was nothing serious. She placed her gloved hand over his, and he told her he was just glad she was safe. Nanai-san checked on Arx nearby. Eleonore stood apart, watching them quietly from a distance. The room was empty now. Someone entered and pressed their forehead to the floor, apologizing deeply for their brother's behavior. Arx and Eleonore were both caught off guard by the gesture. The person introduced himself as Caesar Kilman, also one of the game's love interests. He was the gentle, soft-spoken prince type who had consistently topped the popularity polls. Arx thought to himself that dealing with a troublesome little brother like Reijou must be rough. Caesar kept apologizing. Caesar confirmed that Reijou had genuinely wanted to dance with Eleonore. He explained that his brother had been thoroughly spoiled and operated under the assumption he could have anything he wanted. Arx noted to himself that Caesar had apparently told Reijou to ask out any girl he liked, and now this had happened. He thought the kid really was just an elementary schooler in every sense. Arx asked what would happen to Reijou. Caesar glanced aside and said it depended on Adalbert-sama's decision, but at minimum, exile was likely. Arx went quiet. Arx cleared his throat and composed himself. He had gotten a little too caught up hearing a word straight out of a fantasy story. Across the room, Reijou snored away, still unconscious. In this world, 10 years old was considered somewhat of an adult. Arx supposed what happened was fair enough. But still, he sat with the weight of everything pressing down. Was the world starting to diverge from the game's main story now? He wondered if the path he and Eleonore were taking had already strayed too far. At this point, the Viscount Reijou Kilman route had officially closed. That meant something had shifted. The story itself was changing. He hoped Eleonore's fate could change too. Someone asked if everything was okay. He'd been gone for a while. When she realized he'd returned, her whole face shifted. She burst toward him, her expression full of worry and relief. He caught her as she reached him. She pulled back and looked at him, and the guilt hit her immediately. She insisted she was perfectly fine and tried to assure him. There had been witnesses, she said, but even as she spoke, she couldn't believe what had happened. She'd ended up ruining his birthday party. He didn't respond right away. The weight of it hung between them. She stayed close, and something in her softened. It had just taken some time for things to settle and for them to apologize, that was all. She reminded him that there were witnesses. She peered at him through the doorway, her eyes searching his face. She saw what was coming before he said it. He was sorry, he said. The words came out quietly. She drew her hands up, shocked. Why was he apologizing? The fault didn't lie with him at all. It was entirely because of that man and his outrageous behavior. A bandit, causing all of this chaos. She grabbed him, pulling him close. If only she'd remembered sooner, she thought. If she'd properly checked the guest list, she could have removed him before even sending the invitation. That one simple thing would have changed everything. He looked at her, and something sad crossed his face. He was too naive, he realized. He should have been able to prevent this from happening in the first place. He stood there, lost in his own thoughts. She looked at him from across the room, watching him spiral. He was blaming himself for not checking the guest list properly. If he had remembered sooner, he could have gotten the bandit removed before the invitations ever went out. Below, her hair fell long and still across her lap. He spoke, and she heard something shift in him. At the top, fabric rippled in motion, a ribbon or cloth caught in a moment suspended in time. They sat close together. Her long hair flowed around them both as she leaned toward him. His hand reached out carefully, hesitant. Her eyes were wide, searching his face. Everything around them felt quieter. There was only the two of them now. She spoke, and her voice carried a weight that made the moment heavier. As long as she had him, she said, nothing else mattered. She didn't care about anyone else. The way she said it wasn't soft or gentle, it was absolute. A promise that included everything and maybe something darker underneath. His expression shifted as he took in what she'd said. Below them, small creatures scattered across the ground. They were caught between one breath and the next. He asked something, his voice uncertain. She looked back at him, confused. She said she wasn't sure if what happened would be considered ruined or something else. They didn't know that part yet. But there was a question she needed to ask him. Something nervous in the way she carried herself. She asked if he would do something for her. Would he like to go outside for a bit? At the bottom, the text marked this as scheming out of the part together. Outside the venue, Arx caught up to Eleonore and asked if she had danced with anyone at the party. She said no, not once. He was surprised. She had turned every invitation down. Arx didn't understand why. He knew dancing was central to noble gatherings. The whole point was to meet people and make connections. Eleonore turned to face him. She had wanted her first dance to be with him. She just couldn't work up the nerve to ask. The night before, she had wanted to ask him then too, but didn't. That explained why she had been acting strange the day before. Arx only just put it together. He pointed out that he had never danced before and asked if she was really okay with someone like him. Eleonore laughed a little and admitted she wasn't very good at it either. Then she added, besides, no one would see them out here. Not even the moon. Eleonore spread her arms out and grinned. If he tripped, she'd be the only one to see it. Arx relaxed. She was right. No reason to be embarrassed. Eleonore held out her hand and formally asked Arx Leaford if he would take it. He accepted. The two of them began to dance under the open night sky. Back at the venue, two noble men rushed up to Arx in a commotion. One offered to pay whatever he wanted to come work for them. The other pushed to make him a servant in their household. Arx just stared. Arx tried to stay calm while the men went on about how he had stood his ground against the Kilmander and how precise his magic had been. They were eager to recruit him. He started to turn them down, beginning to explain, but then he spotted Eleonore nearby watching the exchange. He paused. He told them he was already Eleonore's servant. Eleonore watched from a short distance away, confused by what was happening. She looked at Arx, then glanced between the men. Something about it made her smile quietly to herself. The birthday party finally ended. Arx had hoped to take a break, but that wasn't happening. A party meant setup and cleanup both. Arx was still worn out and quietly hoped his next post would be less demanding. Out on the balcony, he wondered if there was any way to wrap things up before midnight. Then came a knock on the door, followed by Nanai's voice calling his name. Nanai announced that cleanup was done. Arx was shocked. She had already finished. She said it was because he had worked so hard that everyone else got motivated and pushed through faster. Arx stared at her. She confirmed it was because of him. Arx scratched his cheek. That was a little embarrassing. Nanai smiled and said it was worth it. Eleonore had enjoyed herself, so all the effort paid off. Arx let out a tired grin and said he could say that much with confidence. Nanai said watching Arx reminded her of something from her past. She asked how so. She recalled throwing a small birthday party for a childhood friend back when they were kids, both orphans, and the celebration was a modest one. All she had wanted was to give her friend a reason to smile. She said she saw a bit of her younger self in Arx. Nanai glanced over at Arx and Eleonore together, then suggested they were a little like childhood friends themselves. Arx went quiet. The word caught him off guard. Nanai confirmed it. That was why it felt nostalgic to her. Something felt off to Arx. Eleonore's childhood friend. He turned it over in his head. Did someone like that even exist in the Celestia Kingdom? His own existence was already irregular, so maybe it made sense. But the unease stayed. Nanai called his name, pulling him back. Nanai noticed he seemed distracted and asked if he was okay. He said he had just zoned out for a moment. She suggested he was probably tired and should get to bed early, then called over to the others to make one last push. Arx agreed, half asleep on his feet, and quietly reminded himself to finish his work. He had promised to visit Eleonore once cleanup was done. He shot up, realizing he had completely fallen asleep. Just moments ago, he had been passed out cold. Eleonore was going to be upset about this for at least a week. He was already dreading it. Arx snapped back and told himself he was probably just imagining things. He knocked on Eleonore's door and identified himself, apologizing for being late. Silence. She was probably already asleep. He cracked the door open quietly, decided not to wake her, and resolved to apologize properly in the morning. Something slammed into Arx and knocked him to the floor. Dark shapes scattered around him as he hit the ground hard. The door clicked open. Arx sat on the floor, surrounded by creeping darkness. His eyes went wide. The dark mass hissed and spread. He had no idea what he was looking at. He called out for Eleonore. No answer. Still catching his breath, he pushed himself up and looked around. She was somewhere nearby, sitting still in the dark. He had to find her. He had to make sure she was okay. His body wouldn't cooperate. He knew he needed to get up, but nothing moved. The darkness pressed in around him. Then, a sound close by. A figure stood over him. He looked up. Eleonore was there, standing quietly. He stared at her, confused. She stood surrounded by dark tendrils creeping up from the ground around her. Arx stared, struggling to process what he was seeing. He said her name. She said nothing, just looked at him. Dark energy cracked through the floor above. Arx looked up at Eleonore. She looked back at him and said his name quietly. He was still trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Eleonore immediately called out that he was late. Arx went wide-eyed. She had prepared sweets just for him, since he had barely eaten all day. She pushed him into a seat and told him to eat. He had no idea how to respond. Arx hesitated. Eating sweets this late would get him scolded by Nanai. Eleonore told him to think of her as his partner in crime and pushed a cookie toward his mouth. He went along with it, completely thrown off. He had no idea how this had become his situation. Arx asked what the magic she had just used was. Eleonore paused, then sat down across from him and asked what he wanted to know. He asked directly, what kind of magic was that? She asked him to make some tea first. He agreed. As she moved to fetch it, Arx flinched. The dark tendrils followed her across the room, trailing close behind. He watched her uneasy. Eleonore explained it was her Celestia, the unique magic given to each person in this world. Arx already knew about Celestia from the game. Each person received their own, and it shaped who they were. He asked quietly when hers had appeared. Arx already knew Eleonore's Celestia from the game. He had seen what she did with it. In the game's story, she used that same power to carry out terrible things. He held his tea and told himself to stay calm, but the memory of what he had seen made it hard. Eleonore apologized for startling him. She said it started about a month ago. She woke up one day and the power was already spilling out on its own. Arx stared at her. A whole month, and she had said nothing. He asked why she never told him. She began to answer. She had been afraid he would hate her if he found out. Arx told her that wasn't true, but seeing it in person had shaken him. He understood now, on a real level, why she was called the cursed child and humanity's enemy. He didn't say that out loud. Eleonore turned and pointed out that it was actually useful. She could move things around with it. When he got knocked down earlier, she had let a little of it out on purpose. Arx went quiet, watching the dark tendrils curl along the floor near her feet. The dark power edged closer, and Arx flinched back slightly. The scene shifted to a memory, people turning away from Eleonore. That was when it finally clicked for him. Eleonore said she was cursed, wasn't she? No matter how hard she tried to hold it back, the power kept stirring. She told Arx he would leave her too. She already knew it. Arx said nothing. Eleonore said the person who once told her they would never leave was her mother. Arx went still. Her mother had never appeared in the game, and not once since he came to this world had Eleonore brought her up. Even back when she couldn't control her power and everyone pulled away, her mother had held her close. But by the time she was 5, even her mother was gone. She had heard her mother return to her family home and had no intention of ever coming back. Arx stared at her, unable to speak. That look in her eyes when they first met finally made sense. She had been carrying this for a long time. Eleonore said quietly that it was fine, it was just her fate. Arx looked at her and said nothing yet. Arx knew he couldn't undo the fact that her mother had left. Eleonore stood with her back to him, voice trailing off as she said she was sure that to anyone. Arx reached out his hand, but Arx called her name and pulled her close. Eleonore froze. He held on and thought. He wanted to accept her as she was. Arx told her being hated wasn't her fate. He acknowledged that her power might scare people, and that some might be careless enough to say the wrong thing. But even so, he wanted to stop her from falling into darkness. Arx said he would keep holding her hand. Eleonore stared at him, wide-eyed. Arx immediately started sweating, wondering if he had said something weird out of nowhere. Silence. Then Eleonore sank down behind the chair and muttered that she really was hopeless. Arx blinked. She let out a small laugh. Eleonore smiled and said she had really been hoping he would say that. Arx looked at her. He told her he would say it as many times as it took, because he meant it. He held her close and thought. He wanted to protect her, as a friend, as a servant, and as her childhood friend. Then he stopped. Something didn't add up. In the original game, why did Eleonore fall into darkness? Was it really just the discrimination she had faced growing up? No, from what she had just told him, it was clear that wasn't the whole story. Eleonore said quietly that if he ever left, she thought she might fall apart. Arx went still. Eleonore said just the thought of Arx being gone too was enough to make her imagine something terrible. Arx told her not to joke like that. Then something came back to him, a fact he had pushed aside. He was going to vanish. The game described the final boss as someone calm and sensitive by nature who had lost a close friend to a villainous noble in childhood and fallen into darkness from the suffering she endured. Arx knew what that meant for him. If things stayed as they were, he would probably die 5 years after the game began, before he turned 15. And because of that, Eleonore would fall into darkness and become the final boss who tormented everyone. Eleonore asked him to let her believe what he had just said. Arx said yes, but his power was already stirring with a different answer, one that said he would betray her. He felt it clearly. Arx took a hit and was thrown back. Outside the mansion grounds, his trainer demanded one more round even though Arx was covered in cuts. Arx said he was fine and tightened his grip on his weapon. 5 years left, maybe less. There was no time to rest. Arx swung hard. He was going to become the strongest before that time ran out. Their weapons clashed hard. Arx stumbled back, breathing heavy, and insisted he was fine. His trainer told him to take a break. Arx pushed back. This was nothing. The trainer noticed that every time he knocked Arx down, Eleonore's glare from the sidelines got worse. He had no idea when she had shown up. The trainer called the session off for now. Arx agreed, and Eleonore stepped forward. Arx told her she could have just said something. She said she didn't want to get in the way while he was working hard. He asked about her lessons with Nanai. Already done, she said, leaning casually against him. She told him he was welcome to praise her. Arx stared at her. She grinned. The two of them stood together, and Eleonore looked quietly pleased with herself. Arx patted her head and said she was amazing. Eleonore grinned. He was happy she was doing well, but his thoughts drifted back. On the night of the party, something had clicked. He had spent all this time trying to stop Eleonore from falling into darkness. And now he understood. The real reason she fell was the death of her childhood friend. Him. He had thought he was changing the story's direction, but it turned out he had not changed a single thing. If he died, she would become cold and ruthless, and in the end die herself as the final boss. That was the one outcome he had to prevent. He had also considered making her hate him on purpose, but Eleonore called his name. She leaned closer and asked him to pet her properly. Arx thought. Pushing her away would be far worse. He patted her head steadily, resigned to it. He was glad she had grown attached to him. He also did not want to die. In the end, there was no other way. He had to survive by becoming the strongest. Eleonore stared at him steadily from the side. Eleonore pointed out he had been acting strange lately. Arx laughed it off nervously. He imagined what would happen if he just told her the truth, that he was supposed to die, and because of that, she would end up hurting people. He pictured her reaction and immediately decided there was no way he could ever say that. The trainer cut in and said Arx just wanted to show his good side at the ritual of trials. Eleonore went still. The trainer added that ever since Arx turned 10, he had been fired up about it. Eleonore looked at Arx quietly. Arx quickly said he had something urgent to take care of and stepped away. Eleonore asked if he was okay. He looked pale. He kept walking. She watched him go, holding something small in her hand. Arx rushed inside. This was bad. He had completely forgotten something important. The ritual of trials. The ritual of trials, a ceremony where 10-year-olds entered a dungeon to test their strength and nerve. This was the event where he was most likely to die. Safety was supposed to be guaranteed, but if anything irregular was going to happen, it would happen here. He had no idea what to do. He had no idea how to get through it alive. He let out a long breath, then steadied himself. There was no way he was going to die. He pushed open a door and went back to work. He trained outside, then studied at a desk, running through everything he could think of. His notes and books covered the table around him. Ark sat at his desk surrounded by research, maps, texts, documents with partial notes. He stared at it all, fist clenched, trying to figure out something useful. The night before the trial, he had learned there would be poisonous creatures inside. He had done everything he could, but lying back in the dark, one thought remained. Would he still die tomorrow? At the very least, he wished he knew how it was supposed to happen. That felt way too unfair. What kind of death would be enough to push Eleonore into darkness? He lay there in the dark, turning it over. The trial had begun. They needed to reach the center of the forest. Eleonore was nearby, trembling slightly. Arx confirmed the objective, then reached back and gripped her hand. Don't worry, he said. Eleonore asked if he was scared. Arx told her he would protect her. Inside, he knew the truth. He had been terrified ever since he found out he was going to die. But what scared him more was the thought of Eleonore getting hurt. He said so plainly, and she stared up at him. She started to say something. Eleonore said she would be counting on him if it came to that. Arx snapped back to focus. He told himself it was okay. He had done everything he could. He agreed, and they moved forward. Arx clenched his fist. All that was left now was to trust himself. Eleonore called out for them to go. The two of them walked side by side into the forest. The ritual of trials had begun. Deep in the forest stood the sacred stone. The trial was to reach it and claim a fragment on their own. Arx figured the other participants were probably all first-timers. The forest had guards posted throughout. Strong monsters didn't appear here, but noble children still needed protection. Eleonore called his name. She asked if he noticed something. He said it was nothing, just his imagination. She said she had felt like something was watching them for a while now. Arx went quiet for a moment. Her instincts were sharp. He already knew that. He told her it was fine. If anything came up, he would protect her. Eleonore grabbed his sleeve and said she was counting on him. Arx spotted one of the guards and quietly told all of them to stay out of sight. The guard mouthed a thank you. Something rustled in the bushes nearby. Arx tensed. Guards? No, wait. Was this the thing that was supposed to kill him? A large, fluffy, horned creature stepped out of the brush. An owl mirage, a horned hare. Eleonore stared at it. It was indeed one. Arx noted that it looked soft, but it was a bloodthirsty creature. Eleonore asked if he was going to kill it. The creature charged, and Eleonore recoiled. It came in fast, horn aimed forward. Arx stepped in and cut it down in one clean move. Eleonore asked if it was over. Arx caught his breath and sheathed his weapon. She noticed there was no blood. Arx crouched down beside the creature. He explained he had used a technique that only cuts internally. Eleonore went quiet. She looked at the creature. It had been moving around just a moment ago. She asked if he was unsettled by it. Arx looked up at her. Eleonore said it was hard to see, but she understood it couldn't be helped. Arx felt a quiet pride. She had come a long way. Part of the trial was learning that taking life was sometimes necessary to survive. Eleonore said it was still sad when something that looked that way had to die. Arx agreed. She said that if she could, she trailed off. She said she would keep them locked away somewhere safe, forever. Dark specks floated around her. Arx stared at her expression. Something fell off, but he brushed it aside. Eleonore cheerfully asked if they should get moving. He agreed, and they pressed on. Someone was watching them from behind as they walked away. They reached the sacred stone. Both of them stared at it. Arx said they should start collecting fragments right away. They got what they came for. Arx held up the container of fragments, relieved. Eleonore sat down, exhausted, and asked to take a short break. Arx agreed, but then something else caught his attention. Other kids were up ahead. They had gotten turned around earlier and fallen behind. One of the boys recognized Arx and called out that his mother and the others had really liked him, and it had caused him trouble. Arx realized the boy had probably been scolded for not measuring up. The boy confirmed it and gave him a pointed look. A girl beside him said she had seen Eleonore somewhere before too. The boy turned and pointed her out. The other kids speculated about Eleonore among themselves. Arx stepped closer, tense. The kids suddenly noticed something moving nearby and bolted. Arx muttered under his breath about people saying whatever they wanted. Eleonore reached out and stopped him. Eleonore told him to stop. Arx hesitated. She asked if he thought that had bothered her. Eleonore said she was used to it. There was no need to worry. Arx stepped back. He thought to himself that he had probably gotten too overprotective, knowing her death would push her into darkness. And besides, she had gotten stronger too. He felt a little relieved. She smiled at him. As long as he acknowledged her, nothing else mattered. Arcs noticed she'd gotten stronger. He was strong, sure, but with Arcs around, guards seemed kind of pointless. Arcs asked him to respond right away if anything happened. He looked so worried that ignoring him was impossible. He crouched down and checked the footprints. He didn't recognize them. The prints belonged to the commoner kids. Nothing had happened, so he felt relieved now. He decided to check with the scouts ahead just to be safe. Arcs reacted with confusion. He tried to reassure Arcs that it was probably nothing. The dark-turned flag crept closer. More people kept arriving at the sacred stone site. Arcs noticed the crowd growing and mentioned to his companion that they'd done what they came to do and should probably head out soon. Then, from somewhere nearby, a voice called out desperately. Someone was asking if anyone was there. The voice belonged to a girl hiding in the bushes, clearly worked up. She told Arcs that her friend had gone missing. Arcs asked what happened. She explained that the friend she'd been with just moments ago had vanished. Arcs went still. She described what happened on the way to the sacred stone. Her friend had suddenly started muttering strange things, something about home, over and over. It scared her, so she ran. But she got worried and went back, and by then he was gone. Arcs quietly wondered if the boy had panicked and tried to leave on his own. When she returned to where she'd last seen him, he was surrounded by armed adults. Arcs recognized them as Ancina's family guards. He figured they'd probably spotted the boy acting strangely and stepped in to take him somewhere safe. Arcs told the girl he understood and would go check on things himself. She said his name quietly, watching him go. Arcs told Eleonore he was going to bring the friend back and asked her to wait there. Eleonore turned away with a quiet huff. Arcs looked at her, then softly acknowledged that being left alone wasn't exactly fun. He figured she was sulking. He gently patted her on the head and promised he'd be back soon. Eleonore looked up at him, then quietly said she understood. She told him to be careful. Arcs smiled and promised he'd be right back. He headed off into the forest, and the trees swallowed him up. Arcs called out for the guards, announcing himself. No one answered. He thought it was odd. They were supposed to be close by? He kept moving and kept calling, but the forest stayed completely silent. He ran deeper in. Arcs ran until he was out of breath. No one was anywhere. He wondered if the guards had already taken the lost boy back, and they'd simply missed each other. He thought about heading back to Eleonore. Then something rustled in the bushes nearby. Arcs stopped. He had no idea how he'd ended up where he was. His eyes focused, and in the distance through the rain, several figures moved among the trees. The boy from the pilgrim group spotted Arcs and asked if he was the one who'd gone to look. Arcs confirmed it. The boy asked if Arcs would be okay. The girl said he'd be fine. He was strong, and he'd handled monsters without flinching earlier. She added that besides, she remembered the promise he had made, that he would never let go of her hand. She was sure he wouldn't leave her behind. Arcs had promised he would return. The other girl said they shouldn't worry and should just wait for him. Then she let out a small laugh. The boy asked what was funny. She said it was nothing, really, just something she noticed. She pointed out that Arcs and Eleonore must be really close. Eleonore went quiet. The girl reflected that yes, they probably were, but when it came to Arcs, she still felt unsure about something. She apologized for pulling them into this situation. The boy told her not to worry about it. Arcs told himself to calm down and focus on investigating the area. He reasoned through it. This forest wasn't supposed to have anything capable of strong magic. He thought it might be some kind of illusion barrier. He worried about whether Eleonore was safe and looked for any clues. Arcs spotted a figure ahead and wondered if it was the missing kid. Before he could get a clear look, the figure's face twisted into something wrong. Dark tendrils spread from it, and it let out a sharp, unnatural laugh. Arcs saw it wasn't human. He moved fast and struck at it hard. The impact sent it crashing back through the trees. Arcs stared at the thing. It reformed, a dark, shifting shape with glowing eyes, and lunged straight at him. He barely dodged, and the creature slashed past him. Arcs pushed it back again with his weapon. He couldn't figure out why something this strong was in a forest that was only supposed to have weak monsters. The fight dragged on, clashing back and forth, neither side landing a clean hit. The creature kept laughing. Arcs caught his breath and sized it up. They were evenly matched, and he knew a drawn-out fight would work against him. He needed to end this fast. Arx used Grand Blaze, one of the most powerful attack spells in the game. He charged in and let it loose. The spell hit and tore through the creature. It shrieked and came apart, dark pieces scattering into the rain. Arx caught his breath. The hit hadn't felt clean, and something that powerful should have finished it off. The creature pulled itself back together on the ground, still muttering the same word, home. Arx stared at it. A scorching wind suddenly erupted from the remains. Arx shielded his face from the heat. The blast swept through the trees, and he lost track of the creature completely. Arx looked around. The creature was gone. He wasn't sure if it had died or just vanished. Then something slammed into him from behind and knocked him down. He hit the ground hard. He tried to call up Grand Blaze again, but something was wrong. The spell wouldn't come. 2 guards grabbed him and pinned him down. Arx looked up and recognized them, Ants and his family guards. One of them cast Grand Blaze before Arx could react. Arx couldn't figure out why the Ancinous guards would attack him. They wouldn't just turn on someone without a reason. Then the creature reappeared nearby, swaying, still whispering about home. Arx put it together. The creature was using some kind of hypnosis spell, and the guards were under its control. Fire hadn't worked. Arx switched to Wind Blade and threw it at the creature. It dodged. Arx tensed. This was bad. The creature moved off into the dark. Arx watched the direction it went, and his stomach dropped. That way led straight back to where he'd left Eleonore. The trial run that was supposed to go smoothly had gone wrong, and the creature was heading right toward her. The boy from the pilgrim group mentioned that Arx had gone looking for a complete stranger's friend. That was pretty kind of him. Eleonore agreed, then added quietly that he was maybe too kind, even to people other than her. She kept that last part to herself when the boy asked what she meant. The boy said Arx was a great guy and started talking about something that happened recently. Then mid-sentence, he stopped. He couldn't remember who he was talking about. Eleonore looked at him, confused. The boy said they'd just been together a moment ago, but now he couldn't recall the name or face at all. Eleonore felt uneasy. Then someone called out. Arx was back, and the others had been looking for him. Eleonore's unease sharpened. The boy spotted a group in the distance and pointed out that the person he'd been trying to remember was there. Eleonore looked and recognized the lost child, the one Arx had gone to find. But Arx wasn't with them. She noticed that right away. The boy went over and told Arx they'd been worried. Arx didn't respond. He just stood there, still and quiet. The boy tried again, but Arx reached toward him without a word. The creature surged out from behind Arx and slammed into the boy. Eleonore yelled for it to stay away from him. The sacred stone behind them cracked apart with a massive impact. Everyone scattered in panic. Eleonore and the boy stared at the split stone. Eleonore ran toward Arx. Arx told everyone to run and get as far away as possible. He thought he'd just made it in time. 1 second later, and it wouldn't have been the stone that got hit. The children nearby were shaking, asking what was happening. Arx fired Grand Blaze and blocked the creature's path. He wanted to help everyone get out, but the creature kept pushing him back. He struck hard, and the blades clashed, but he couldn't get a clean hit. The creature pressed down on him with overwhelming force. Arx braced but got knocked to the ground, and the creature came at him again with its claws. Arx took the hit and pushed back, landing a solid blow, but the creature absorbed it and kept coming. The creature slashed him across the side. Arx grunted and dropped to one knee. The dark mass slithered around him, closing in. Eleonore called his name. She was still there with the others, not yet safe. The creature loomed behind her. She froze. Arx fired Grand Blaze to push it back and put himself between the creature and Eleonore. He shouted at her to run while he held it off. The creature hit him again. Eleonore didn't move. Arx was already badly hurt and knew he couldn't win. But if he ran, Eleonore and the others would be in the creature's path. He understood what that meant. This was where Eleonore's childhood friend died in the original story. And now Arx was about to take that same hit. The memory of reading the story came back to him. No matter what he tried, the outcome didn't change. He wondered if his death and Eleonore's fall into darkness were things he simply couldn't stop. He kept fighting, but the creature had him pinned. It laughed. Arx trembled. He thought about whether he was going to die here, failing to protect her. The creature started herding the controlled guards toward the group. The children screamed and scrambled back. Eleonore pressed herself against the stone, wide-eyed. Arx shouted at Eleonore to forget about him and run. He had one thought. He had to save her. The creature closed in around him, and Eleonore's eyes went wide. A memory surfaced, a younger Arx telling Eleonore he wanted to be with her and asking if she would be his friend. He promised from that day on he would stay by her side. Eleonore told him she was so glad he was safe. Arx stood close. She reached for his hand. His name was the only thing in her mind. Eleonore's thoughts broke apart into something darker. Arx, don't. He is her one and only. Something snapped in her. She moved through the dark and the rain, one thought driving her forward. He was her one and only. Arx barely called out her name before his vision started going. Something massive was building around him. He recognized what it was. The dark mass and the broken stone were swallowed up entirely. Eleonore stood in the center of it, breathing hard, surrounded by black tendrils. Her Celestia unleashed at full force, and it consumed everything around her.